Welcome to Goldfish on Games and Cover Disc Face Off XL, the only show foolish enough to put the 5 main Amiga magazines of June 1992 against each other. And joining us in this 90s battle royale is Amiga Format, Amiga Action, The One for Amiga, Amiga Power, and See You Amiga. Fight! The One for Amiga is starting us off, with 2 discs like most of the magazines this month, but they filled it with 2 demos and 3 PD titles, as well as a bit of extras. Grab your hat and whip, as the first demo is for Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. But if you're expecting the excellent adventure game, then you're going to be disappointed, as this is the action game. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, well, they made 2 games out of the same basic story. There was the one that everyone remembers, and then this, an isometric action game that does not hold up particularly well, as the controls are a little clunky, with you having to tap left and right to slowly rotate yourself around, and then using up to move. And you can also tap back to use the item that you have equipped. This might be to punch, or it might be to use, say, a set of keys. Oh, and you can also use the fire button to jump. You get to play as both Indy and Sophia, and you'll quickly get to check both of them out, as it's very easy to lose a character to the searchlights, that I swear are actively tracking you while you're meant to be hidden in the darkness. And to be honest, this whole bit is just not fun. Although I can't fault them on the size of this demo, as once you do finally get past those lights, there is the space to explore, which is also very easy to get lost in. If this demo is any indication of the full game, and I get the feeling it is, it's quite obvious why this is a mostly forgotten title. It's just not good. Our first PD game of the episode is Galaxians, a PD version of, well, Galaga. As we have the waves flying in to start with, so you get to shoot at them before they form ranks. Visually, this looks quite spot on, with some nice animations on the crafts as they move around. I'm not sure if they did those by hand, or if they just wrote some nice rotation code to handle it. You also get to shoot at 2 additional angles, which is handy, and then there's the main feature of the original, losing a ship to get double fire later. Galaga and Galaxian aren't games that I've really put a lot of time into. At least the original arcade versions. I played various home ports and fan versions over the years, and this one seems decent. But I couldn't say if it's got anything more or less than the arcade version. Our next demo is for Pushover, and this must have been based on the final game, as they managed to include at least part of the intro for the demo, which included some of the few instances of us seeing Colin, who managed to lose his quavers down a hole. This very obviously leads us on to a puzzle game where we push over dominoes, with the objective being that that one with the 3 lines is the last one to be knocked over. This would typically require you to move a few of the dominoes around, but in this first level, you actually just need to push the right one. And that's it, you can then go to the exit. Thankfully, there is more to this demo than just a single level, and the second one even has different graphics. And you get to play around with some of the other domino types as well. Now there's 3 levels in total, and it gives you a good idea of what you can expect from the full game. And even better, all 3 seems to be unique for the demo. Team 17 gifted us with a special PD game in the form of Waggle-O-Mania. No, they weren't predicting the rise of the Wii, they were instead getting you ready for the joystick waggling games that were expected due to the Olympics being on that year. So waggle your way to a high score, challenge your friends, work those throbbing wrist muscles. Are you tough enough? then it's on to the waggling itself. The faster you waggle, the higher the bar. The higher the bar, the more points you get. And, freak of nature is good, right? Right? And the final demo from the one is Striker, a football game with more of a 3D into the screen style view. And while it looks like I'm playing really well, it's all a huge lie, as this is a rolling demo and I have very little control over it. You can push the camera around a little and you can turn a few things on and off like the radar or the lines on the pitch, but that's about it. You just get to watch them play itself. They did also include a few extra files for Formula 1 GP. So you can now play the game with the real names of real racers of the time. Moving on, we have Amiga Format, that included a full program, a demo program, as well as a few PD titles. And that full application is Spectracolor Junior. I think we covered one of the later versions of this program before. And basically, it's an art package, but it's one that's designed to work with the Amiga's ham mode. That is, it allows you to draw far more than just 64 colours to the screen. This lets you draw with almost the entire range of the Amiga's palette, around about 4,000 of them. But as you can imagine, this is a little bit slower than regular old D-Paint. It's a shame that once again they don't really provide any sample images that would really show this off. So instead you get to see me doing the most basic of things. Which is a real shame, as this seems to have so much power, as this has this whole range of wrap features that tries to apply your movements to various shapes. So it would be easier to draw spheres, for example. Or at least that's what the magazine shows it doing in the 4 dedicated pages they had to this. But with my artistic abilities, you're not going to see anything that amazing. The first PD game is Croak, and it's obviously a take on Frogger. Yes, that classic has been brought out once again, in what looks like a fairly faithful recreation. We have the traffic, the turtles that swim up and down in the water, and then there's the flies, and what I think are spiders that can show up in the holes that you need to make it to. The flies give you extra points, while the spiders will kill you, as will the traffic. And wow, that leaves a bit of a mess on the road. Manage to get the frog into all the holes, and then you'll get to do it all over again, just with faster traffic, less logs, and eventually a chicken that will make that safe zone a bit less so. We get a software demo next in the form of Easy Amos. This was a version of Amos designed to be even easier than regular Amos. And this was mostly done by removing some of the more advanced features and adding in a few more helper systems. The demo is further limited by cutting down the number of functions that you can use, and obviously making it so you can't save. But you can load up a number of provided samples so you can see what it does and the code required to do it. I do think I would have found this interesting, even if I would have been more inclined to check out more powerful versions instead. And full versions of those would eventually grace the discs over the years. But I have to say the samples they included were quite cool. And if you wanted to learn more about Amos, then you should check out Yawning Retro Angel, who has made a number of great Amos tutorials and even written up some magazine articles on it. I'll leave a link in the description. The next PD title is Microbes, a game that I think we've seen before, as you have to whiz around the edge of the play area that's meant to be a petri dish and shoot at the little animated microbes in the middle. Leave them alone too long and they will multiply and eventually mutate into other types that are far more aggressive. Let any of them touch the sides and it will drain your shields. Let that happen enough and you will obviously lose a life. It's all quite fast and hectic, and when things really get going, it's possible to very quickly lose your lives, and not even realise it. But thankfully you can collect a few items that will make your shots go faster and further, as well as collect some smart bombs. It's an interesting game, and I do enjoy messing around with it. And the way they make some of the levels a little bit of a puzzle box is quite nice. The final PD title for format is Quick Money, a 2-player only game, and it's the most simplest of styles, as you have to move your ship around the map and then shoot the other player. But they do shake it up a little bit, as you can also shoot at the random computer enemies. Taking them out will give you some points, and those points can be traded at the square in the middle to replenish your shields. As you might imagine, all you need to do is take out the other player to win, and it's not the easiest thing to show off when you're on your own. It might have been fun back in the day with my mates, but right now, it's not one that I will return to. On top of these titles, there's one last thing, Hunter 3, and it's a little hard to show off, as it's a program to rip music modules and audio samples from memory. But this requires you having them still resident in RAM when you run the program, which isn't always possible. And then you have to walk through the memory until you find where the samples are. This means listening to lots of garbled sound, but if you're lucky, you might stumble on the right area. Let's move on to Amiga Power, that provided 2 demos and 2 PD titles over 2 discs. First up is Legend, an RPG with all the classic tropes, as we start in this medieval style town with a 4-person team, and we can visit various places like the blacksmiths or the Holy Temple, where I'm not sure I trust priests. Even less likely to trust them when they have red eyes. But eventually we will arrive at the game proper, which is this 3D isometric style title. And suddenly, I'm starting to remember this. I think we checked out its sequel a while back. And it appears to be based on this very interesting system, in which you can move a single character around and interact with the environment, like searching and open up items. And then when you travel to a new room, your whole party will move on their own. They can also do this in fights, and it will let the computer control how they battle, which means you can pick a character like the wizard and cast fireballs, while the others smash the baddies with swords and sticks. But don't run away from a fight, as the chicken in the HUD will crow at you, and then the enemies will just simply follow you anyway. There does seem to be a lot here, and it's something that I could see me going back and playing more and more back in the day. The second demo is for Aqua Adventure, that starts off strong, showing some 3D action on the title screen. And this continues into game, as this is a 3D shooter, one that's pushing the little A500 very hard. You get to fly around shooting at everything from spawners to craft to solar panels, but you only get to do this in 60-second goes, and then you have to start all over again. I think this is a very stingy amount of time, as just as you're getting going, it's all over. And there seems to be a lot of targets and things to attack. But if you manage to find some of them in the time provided, is a bit hit and miss. Particularly when there are a few objectives for you to do. Like you need to take out the solar panels before you can take on the generator. So yeah, this has you wanting more, but I'm not sure it's really showing you enough to really let you know what the game's going to be like. but it does have some seriously impressive amount of polygons going on, particularly with the main craft and all the other objects in the game, which includes some nice sprite work with some lovely scaling effects going on. It feels like something that would really shine on the A1200, but that machine, it wouldn't be released for another 4 months. Jumping over to PD, and we start with the ridiculously named Attack of the Green Smelly Aliens from the planet 27B6. This is actually a take on Space Invaders, honest. But now they are rotating around while slowly getting closer to the middle, where you are, and you're locked in place. Now you can rotate and shoot out through the holes to attack those smelly aliens, but it's much harder now, as trying to estimate where they're going to be is not easy. Plus your laser is a little bit odd, as you can fire a number of smaller shots or a longer one, but it's not consistent when it does that. The aliens will also shoot at you from time to time, with your main defense being the shield walls, that you can thankfully rotate. It's an impressive bit of PD, with a proper Amiga mod track music, with samples and everything. So it's no wonder that it was entered into the Amiga Power competition to win a job at Bullfrog. But it didn't win. The previously seen Mr. Wobbly Legs did. But this seems to have been a strong contender, at least in the presentation and originality department. But the actual playing of it, well, it does let it down, as you have to consider a little bit too much, and the shooting, well, it doesn't feel all that great. But it is fun for a short amount of time. The final shareware game for Amiga Power is Mr. and Mrs. That has quite the title screen. This game turns out to be a bit of a platformer, but one with its own twist, as you play as both Mr. and Mrs. And at the start, Mr. is locked in a cage and can't do anything. So you're going to have to switch to Mrs. and go and try and get him out. It's a bit like XOR in that way. And just like that game, there are a few things that aren't immediately obvious when you start. Particularly due to the fact that you only really control one character at the very beginning. One of the main ones is that only Mrs. can pick up the keys and open doors. Mr. gets to turn on light bulbs to light up rooms. On top of all this, there's also a pretty complex bonus system that revolves around snooker, but that's way beyond the bounds of me and this video. So because of this key dynamic and switching of characters, the game ends up being a bit of trial and error, as it's possible to use the keys in the wrong doors and thus blocking your progress. So this is all about the puzzling as well as the platforming. Now if this had slightly better graphics, I would have called this a bit of a hidden gem and a classic. But as it stands, it's a cool game, but I think they could have spent a bit more time on its presentation. Next up we have CU Amiga, that filled its 2 discs with a huge number of utilities, as well as a full program, 4 PD games, as well as a demo. So this is going to be a big one. So let's start with that full program, which is GB Route. This allows you to look at a map of the roads of the UK and then plan routes between cities. For example, this month I visited Amiga Kickstart, that was in Nottingham, and from around the Warwickshire area that I live, to there, this is the route that it would have picked. Which when compared to Google Maps is actually quite close. Well, apart from the cost, I wish it cost just under £5. I could have seen this being a useful program back in the day, but only if you had a printer, as unfortunately we couldn't run our Amigas in our cars back then. Let's jump to a few of the PD games, and the first being Ducks. This was a hidden game in Lotus 2, and as such it's a little bit basic, as it's a simple shooting gallery game. You just need to hit everything that keeps looping around, and that's it. Now every so often you might also want to shoot at the numbered targets, as that will give you more bullets, but do that and you'll get to go on to the next stage, where you'll get to do it all over again, but a little bit quicker. And for some reason, you will also lose some of your bullets every so often. I never worked that bit out. It's all very basic and simple, and not too much to say about it really. So let's move on to the next hidden game, which is Chrome, that was stored in Switchblade 2. This is far more advanced than what we've just seen, as it's a bit of a platforming shooting game. Just don't be too quick to fire though, as you only get a limited number of bullets. And there are quite a few bouncing things for you to get through. You also have a time limit that can be further reduced by touching the wrong tile on the ground. There are 20 stages in total, and it will take you quite a lot of play to get through all of them, as this is not the easiest of games. But it was a lot of fun to play. Going back to the first disc, we have a chunk of utilities to check out, like AnyInfo, a program for looking at details of your Amiga, like the chipset, the speed, and various other things. Not quite as good as SysInfo, but I do think it looks nicer. The second utility is SimGem, a program that lets you do the impossible at the time, and that is to put an image on the background of Workbench. This will work with any 2 or 4 colour IFF image, but with Workbench 3 having support for this built in, it wouldn't be all that needed going forward. SuperLock is next, and it's a program for locking your drives, keyboards and other parts of your computer, so you'll need to use a password to unlock. This can be added to the startup sequence of your machine, but with the ability to break the startup sequence, this feels a little pointless. I'm not entirely sure what this is really meant to do, because if you lock the keyboard, you can't even type in the password. So how do you unlock it? I don't think this would be all that useful really, even back in the day. Where the final program would have been really useful, as it's SuperDuper, a disk format and copying program that emphasizes speed. Considering how many discs I copied for mates, all completely legitimate discs, honestly, this would have been really cool. Even though we would eventually move over to Xcopy, because we wanted to make sure the copies that we made were as close to the originals as possible, this would have been a huge step up from the built-in Workbench one. Going back to some PD, and we have Drip. There seems to be quite a few PD titles across the magazines this month, and that might have been due to the lack of the party juice, because it was being tapped by someone else, and the only way to get it back would be to rust all those pipes. In what ends up being a bit of a mix between Pac-Man and City Connection, as we need to travel around this maze turning the pipes to red, but there are things wandering around that will try and kill you, as well as stuff dripping out of pipes that will also kill you, and other things that will mess you up. But to aid you in this, you can do this limited jump that will send you down, which will help you get out of their way. There's also this bubble that you can ride around in, that will make it much easier to get some of those pipes that seem to be not connected, and there's other power-ups and things that will come along that you'll need to deal with. All in all, an interesting title, but for some reason, it didn't really stick with me. Mouthman is the final PD game from CU Amiga, and after the variation on Pac-Man, we get more or less a direct copy. This seems to be a relatively competent version of the game, but it does feel like it's moving a little bit slow. But this tended to be how they ramped up the difficulty in some of these PD versions, as it gets faster on each level. I'm not quite sure they got the movement logic for the ghosts quite right, but they do seem to move around decently enough. So overall, it's not bad if you're looking for a basic Pac-Man game. And if that's all you want, then you can't go wrong with this. And what I thought was the only game demo for CU Amiga is Zool. But it's not a playable demo, it's an animation instead. One that I hadn't seen before, and it uses the Zool rock music. And it has him playing air guitar and then taking on various baddies. As a Zool fan, this is really cool to look back on. But I think at the time, if I got this rather than a proper demo, I would have been a little bit annoyed. And it turns out there was 2 other animations on the disc as well, but due to CU screwing up, you couldn't actually view them, as they packed them up but they didn't provide you a way of unpacking them. That is, unless you use Power Packer that they provided in the previous month and you use that to decrunch it. Once you've done that, you can view them in DPaint 3. And with that, we're on to the final magazine of the month, Amiga Action, who across 2 discs provided 3 demos, and the first of which is a favourite of mine, it's Dynablaster. For those of you not in the know, and who don't recognise that intro music, this was an official port of Bomberman to the Amiga. But why some of the Euro versions of this game was called Dynablaster, I couldn't tell you, but they are the same game. Now in this demo we get a number of single player levels, in which we already have a few upgrades, so you can really let rip with a number of bombs. And I was surprised at the number of worlds that they let us check out in this demo, as each had their own baddies and backgrounds, so there was a lot of content here for us to mess around with. But it seems that this was also a month of rolling demos, as you couldn't play the battle mode. Now without the dongle that came with the full version of the game, you couldn't have connected up 2 more joysticks to have a full 5-player game, but most of the time we just played this in 2-player mode anyway. And I get why they would have locked it off, as if I could have played this demo with my mates, then we would have done this all the time. And it's not all that often that I complain about the lack of a multiplayer mode in these cover discs, but this is one of those few instances where it would have been great. I can't blame the publisher, but it would have been cooler if they gave us it. The second demo is for Jaguar XJ220. We've seen this game before, but they have included a different track for us to race on, and it's a nighttime one. And what makes this even better is it's not timed. It's just us versus the rest of the racers across 6 laps, which is a nice change of pace from some of the timed demos that we've seen. This is a fast and fun racing game, and in this mode it even has fuel, so at some point you will need to stop to fill up, so you better get far out in front so you won't lose your place. And if you pay attention, you might even spot a shooting star going across the sky every so often. Unlike the Amiga format demo that we've seen before, this one seems far closer to being finished, as we've lost the music and sound effects at the same time, which is a great shame, but in its place we got Amiga Action road signs. I'm not sure that was the best trade ever. This is a fun game and a decent demo. And the final demo for the episode is The Humans, a game clearly inspired by Lemmings. It's also a game that we've seen before, but this seems to be a unique level. You can switch between your various humans via the F keys, and then you can use the joystick to move them around and do actions. Now this might be to form a ladder for others to then climb on top of you, or you might pick up items to use, or even throw. This is all about puzzle solving and trying to complete the objective. Now in this level is to try and get yourself up to the wheel, and you'll need to stack multiple humans on top of each other to be able to get up to it. But it'll take a number of steps to get enough of them up there to be able to do that. Normally this should be a game that I would enjoy, but I've never really gotten on with it, as it's a little bit too annoying, as it doesn't take too much to fall off an edge and get yourself completely stuck, or get yourself into other situations where you are then just completely stuck. So there's this more trial and error element to it than I really like. And it can be quite fiddly with how close you have to be able to get an action to work. And there we have it, 5 magazines and a lot of content. And what piqued my interest the most? Well, in third place I'm going to say Aqua Adventure. It looked impressive and I would have kept playing those 60 seconds at a time. Even if it did annoy me having to restart, it's just a really impressive looking title. In second place I'm going to go with Dynablaster. This would have been an easy first if it had the battle mode, but even without that it had quite a lot of levels and some very catchy music. And in first place, I think I'm going to give it to Mr. and Mrs, as this was a fun PD game with an interesting mechanic. I think it could have looked so much better, but I can overlook that for the fun gameplay. So, what did you think of my choices? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know down in the comments. Also, let me know if you had any of these magazines back in the day and which ones were your favourites. And until next time, I was the Gouldfish, that was a lot of PD, and this was Gouldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun with this video as I did, as I really enjoy making these Cover Disc Face Off videos. And if you did enjoy this, then you should let YouTube know with those buttons, you know the ones I'm talking about. Or you could check out some of my other videos, as I've been looking at these Amiga magazines for a few years now.